Hello everyone, Jester Bell is back, and usually I like to keep my channel pretty PG. You know that. But today I'm going to talk about a comic where it's absolutely impossible for me to keep it PG and not explain to you what's in the comic and why it's so bad. So if you don't want to be grossed out in the slightest, then leave the video now. I'll still try to keep it as toned down as I possibly can. But I want to talk about a comic that just finished its 6-issue run this week, and it is the most disgusting DC comic ever written. I'm sure that there's worse comics out there, worse comics done by independent writers especially, but in terms of a mainstream DC comic, this is the absolute worst that I've ever seen, and I've seen some pretty bad DC comics. So you've been warned. Let's get into it. So the title of the comic, no two ways about it, no getting around this. The title is literally Harley Quinn, the animated series, The Eat, Bang, Kill Tour. And it lives up to its title and is even far worse than its title would suggest. And this comic has been getting a lot of attention. I'm sure it's been getting a lot of sales. But is it getting a lot of sales because it's good or because it's very, very provocative? Well, the answer is the latter. So, as the title suggests, what it's supposed to be is a typical tie-in to a cartoon or TV series, in this case HBO's Harley Quinn animated series, the R-rated adult series. So you kind of figure what this comic is going to be. Will it have a lot of adult humor in it? Will it, just to tie into the show, will it be very much like that show? Well, you would expect that, but at the end of the day, we get something that actually isn't so much like the show. It's a lot worse. So basically, I would say this is a porn comic. That's what it is. No, I'm not exaggerating by saying that. No exaggeration at all on my part. This comic is porn. It's self-indulgent porn. Basically, it sets right after the season 2 where Harley and Ivy get together, and pretty much the entire comic is Harley and Ivy having sex, Harley and Ivy talking about it, Harley and Ivy leading up to it. There are constant references to kinky sex, constant references to doing dirty, nasty, violent things in the bedroom. Jokes about bodily fluids, jokes about bodily smells, dialogue about making it rain on strippers and whatnot. That's essentially what the comic is. It lives up to its title and goes beyond it. It's it's the most disgusting comic I've ever seen. And the comic just really pushes the limits on how much it can show in regards to that stuff, which is why I basically call it a porn comic, because they walk up right up to the line and almost cross it in terms of what you actually see in this comic. And this is a review of me going by what I've seen in the comic and just, seeing panels, because I couldn't finish this because I will not subject myself to this comic, but I got the gist very clearly of it. It's really awful. Before we get into more details of why this comic is so awful, what little plot it has, and the point of this comic is not the plot, it's to be self-indulgent and it's to show off all of these sex scenes. The little plot there is, and I want to talk about this, it's that Poison Ivy is like having an emotional and mental breakdown after what went down with her and Kite Man, and now getting with Harley, who clearly, quote-unquote Harley, these act nothing like the characters in anything, even the animated show. She is stressed out by Harley, and so therefore she keeps having these emotional, mental breakdowns. One minute she is mooning over Harley, and, they're constantly making heart's eyes at each other and acting like horn dogs. The next minute she's screaming at Harley, giving her the silent treatment, just being so frustrated by this mentally ill child constantly. Like, there's two moods. There's her close to just lashing out at Harley and just being so frustrated by her and just hating her antics, or there's her being a horn dog for Harley. And I guess the point, you really only need the first, fifth, and sixth comic to get the point. I guess it's that Ivy has to change her ways and be better to Harley. But what I'm thinking about it is if Ivy is so stressed out by everything that's been going on and not able to be with Harley without lashing out at her like that, then why are they in a relationship at all? Because that's what people keep telling me about this relationship between the two characters, is that they need to happen because they're a healthy and wholesome. I'm sorry, wholesome. Have you seen this comic? Have you seen any of the material with Harley and Ivy? It's always dirty. It's never wholesome. What are you talking about? You guys are always telling me that this is a healthy, wholesome relationship. I don't see it. I see these two characters constantly forced together, no matter the context or no matter how they treat each other, just because it's quote unquote meant to be in the comics, or in shippers' minds, these are the two that need to be together. So, but what I've talked a lot about Harley and Ivy, which this comic is supposed to be about, but it's not really about them, because if you think that I mean, it gets as gross as they almost do it in public at one point. That's how gross this comic is. But it's not just them. Apparently, every female character in this universe is a lesbian in just the same kind of horn dog relationship that Harley and Ivy are in. We see that with Livewire. We see that with Vixen. We'll get to that as well. But it's so self-indulgent, and we see this character come up and help Harley and Ivy just because they're queer and she's queer, and they're like, we got to get to stick together. Us queers need to stick together. And I'm like, if you're in a universe where essentially every woman is a lesbian, why would there be any oppression towards lesbians here? But let's talk about that character who said that. What's also incredibly self-indulgent about this book, it's not just how gratuitously sexualized, putting it mildly, how gratuitously fetishized Harley and Ivy and every female character is. It's the self-inserts. There's like three self-inserts of the writer. There's the woman who's a barista who helps Harley and Ivy out just because they're queer and she's queer. There's this stripper. The story literally stops. Harley gets mad at Ivy for being so incredibly mean to her, and so, like a healthy girlfriend, she goes to the strip club and starts ogling and making the heart's eyes that are constantly in this comic at this stripper, who happens to be a self-insert of the writer of this comic, T. Franklin, who also worked as a prostitute in real life, which she has said on her Twitter a million different times. Healthy relationship. Can you guys believe that DC would actually publish something like this with one of their major characters? The story stops just so she can ogle this stripper, and then later the stripper is like super relevant and it has to be the one that helps Ivy figure out where Harley is. And then the biggest self-insert in this comic is Vixen's girlfriend, who is just who's disabled. She is a lesbian. She's just like T. Franklin in real life. And the story gets away from Harley and Ivy so that it can explain that Vixen and Ellie, the self-insert, have like this incredibly sexualized, incredibly romantic relationship. I heard someone say, this comic might sound mean, but I think it's accurate, that gay relationships in comics are like this weird mix of Hallmark Channel romance and constant porno-style innuendo. Honestly, that's how I feel, especially with this comic. It's like Vixen would do anything for me, and there's just this. I cannot even repeat the dialogue. You can check out Thinking Critical's video where he goes into a bit more in depth. He's actually willing to read the dialogue to you, but it's not romance. It's like this person's false idea that romance is really just about, talking dirty to other people, because that's what it is. It's dirty talk. It actually is toxic to talk about your girlfriend that way. Ellie is constantly talking, bossing Vixen around and talking about, her rear end and whatnot. I'm trying to keep this as PG-13 as I can, but it's impossible to talk about this comic that way. And it's disgusting, and then you get this dialogue from Ivy in her head about their relationship is so fun and non-toxic. And it's like, no one talks like this. This is robot talk. But all the dialogue in the comic is either robot talk like that, or it sounds like it's just being spoken by T. Franklin herself with, the bodily fluids jokes, the talking about strippers and whatnot, and all the talking about dirty sex and whatnot. It's really disgusting. Luckily, we don't get yet another raunchy sex scene with Harley and Ivy at the end, because the comic spends too much time on making sure that T. Franklin's self-insert is the one that saves the day. But, I mean, make no mistake, Harley and Ivy aren't in this comic. Even the one you saw in the HBO shows, they're not. This is just someone's fantasy that they're living out in 6 issues. And I'm not making this to attack the writer who did this. I'm doing this to call out DC. Why did they allow this to be published at all? You know, they may have made a lot of changes to Harley's character, presumably because they want to make her more palatable, but then they go and release material like this, and I just don't understand it. My only thought is that just as I get a little leery of talking about this because it's a comic that's supposed to have a lot of gay relationships in it, and if you criticize the way that those relationships are portrayed in comics, that automatically makes you hateful and homophobic. I think that that's what went on with DC Editorial. I think that they were afraid of saying no to anything that T. Franklin wanted to do, and so they let this comic be released. She references three ways a whole lot and makes that seem romantic in this comic, and I find that gross. But if I were to say that on Twitter and a lot of people were to see that, they get so mad at me because you cannot criticize anything about this comic that's supposed to be pro-LGBT relationship. Anything that's in T. Franklin's fantasy has to go, and I has to go in here. And I imagine if they did deny some things like that outright, then she would use it against DC. Like she tries to use things against people on social media. On social media, she was making she really seems like she wants to weaponize a lot of this stuff for clout, like making a big deal when she's not getting enough press that she asked for, when she changes Vixen to be a lesbian and that she's not getting enough press for that. She was making a big deal that there's not enough disabled representation in comics, and that she is disabled, but that's either an ignorant statement or flat out lying, because there's always been good disabled representation in comics. There's Alicia Masters, who's blind. There's Hawkeye, who struggles with deafness. There's Oracle and Professor Xavier, who are also crippled characters. It's never been a problem in comics to have disabled representation. It's just like something she's using to get more clout for herself. Once again, less towards T. Franklin, there were more to DC Comics. Why did they let a comic so disgusting get released? I don't understand it whatsoever. I hope they don't let this get to trade. It hasn't been announced yet. That could be just because DC's behind. Why would you want this comic out there? Why would you not try to bury it? Maybe after I've spoken up and Thinking Critical's spoken up about it, and some other people have. To be fair, there are some Harlivy fans and some LGBT fans that have spoken against this comic and T. Franklin and the way it's been written. But I just wish DC needs to see that this is unacceptable. The worse they let their comics fall, the more people are going to fall away. They're so desperate to get more and more people to read comics, and then they let stuff like this get released, which is going to get a lot of attention, yes, but not in the way DC wants. It's going to get attention because it's porn. Porn gets attention. You see thumbnails or video titles on the internet that get attention just because they imply because it's sexual or there's something pornographic implied. You see that all the time used as clickbait. So I just wanted to make this to like bring people's attention to this comic. There's so much more I could say about it. The bad dialogue, the artwork looks very childish, and that is also a problem for me when they gives the comic pretense of being for kids when it absolutely is not. There's some pretty horrific faces drawn in the comic, which I'm probably going to put as the thumbnail. But what do you think about all this? Do you think that this is the kind of comic that DC should publish? Do you think that this is a kind of comic DC would have ever published in prior years? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.